Hello, I'm Pete Leiden, the founder of the media company Reinvent. I'm here interviewing today Andreas Schleicher, who's the director of for education and skills at the OECD, rooted in Paris. Great to have you here.
Thanks very much.
So we're trying to just take stock of how people think about the moment we're in right now in terms of where the evolution of the global economy is and technology. And I know you bring a lot of expertise in skills and education, but how would you describe where we are here? Is there anything special happening here? Is there any kind of particular way you think of the junction we're in right now?
Well, the fragmentation of jobs and the multiple tasks means that qualifications mean less and less for people. It's actually the skills that you have, what you can actually currently do that counts, whereas the certificates that you accumulated once in your life actually matter less and less for success. And that sort of creates huge challenges for both companies. How do I actually recognize the knowledge and skills and character qualities that people have? And for workers, how can I actually show what I can do? And that is sort of something that's a unique moment that hasn't happened in the past. In the past, you learn once for your lifetime. You could use your skills. You could sort of get a rent out of this. Today, you need to remain very, very current or rapidly changing demands. And the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have also become easy to digitize. So that's a very challenging moment.
And so how have we gotten into this? Like, how recent is this pressure that's built here, or has this been building for some time, in your opinion?
Well, it's essentially the 2000s with digitalization, which put, where computers got capable of many things that human can do. Sort of technology is substituting workers, and technology is complementing workers. And that's a pretty, you talk about the last 10, 15 years. Not everything that's technological possible is actually happening, but sort of more and more of that is you can see happen.
And when you folks, through the work you do at OECD, when you're looking ahead, are you feeling that, if anything, this will ratchet up and put more pressures on, or how do you think about the next 10 years or so?
Well, when you test classical foundation skills, like, for example, literacy, numeracy, information processing skills, computers are pretty much at the 75th percentile of what people can do. So with your current stock of skills, there's huge pressure on lots of people to dramatically change their skill distribution.
So say more about what you mean by that, by the 75 percentile. Explain that in more kind of context.
Yeah, if I would give people a test looking at the information processing skills, accessing, managing, integrating, evaluating information, I get a distribution. And if I now use today's technology to take that same test, I would get basically computers to do better than 75% of the population.
Wow.
And then you could contrast this with a very slow growth that we have seen in the skill distribution. The United States is a case in point. Those moving into the labor market in the US are no longer better skilled than those moving out of retirement into retirement in a rapidly changed world. Now, that's not the case everywhere. If you go to the Far East, China, Japan, you can see the young people racing ahead. But you take a country like the United States, actually, the stock of skills has been pretty constant, whereas technology, the capabilities of computers have rapidly advanced.
How does that play out in the countries, European countries that are in the OECD?
Europe is a mixed bag on this. You have Northern Europe also, where you can see basically huge investments in education and skills, and generally the willingness of both individuals and companies to invest in upgrading is very high. But other countries in Southern Europe, very kind of lagging behind. Again, can see huge, and you can no longer see that in university qualifications. For example, a Japanese high school graduate has better skills when it comes to digital information processing skills than a Spanish or Italian college graduate. So there's huge variability in the value that formal qualifications have in different countries because of that evolution.
Well, Japan is part of the OECD, right? So, not China, if I recall.
No, China not.
So what are they doing differently there? That's quite interesting, actually. Why is that so different, dramatically different?
It starts in initial education. I mean, essentially, the foundations for learning are set very early in the lives of people, and it's very hard and very expensive to change that later on. So people who have struggled in getting a good school education are unlikely to actually have either the motivation or the capacities to upgrade their skills. That's the sad kind of reality. And what you can see in Japan is that basically there's no tolerance for failure in the education system. There's the expectation that every young person can do well in mathematics and science, and they do. The system invests whatever it takes. If you go to China, some of the provinces, the 10% most disadvantaged Chinese 15-year-olds in Shanghai do better in mathematics than the 10% wealthiest children in the United States. I mean, that is actually possible. You can sort of draw a huge potential out of, but that's unique. We don't have that in Europe, and we don't have that in North America. Maybe Canada a bit. Canada is actually also a good example of investing in human talent, both initially and then building skills when people move into work.
So that's fascinating. So let's take that Japan. So meaning, no matter what the initial IQ or the initial kind of upbringing, or whether the child was raised in a two-parent family, or all those conditions don't matter at some level if the educational system is designed to solve that problem. Is
Pretty
that
much
accurate?
so. I mean, the disadvantaged children in Japan, the system is doing whatever it takes to give them a good education. They assume that every child can learn, and they take whatever route it takes towards learning. Some European countries do well in this as well. They have a mix of learning opportunities. There's not just one model. You could choose between a more academically oriented learning, more vocationally oriented learning. And again, pathways are adapted to match the learning styles of people. It's not, that people are born stupid, but often their kind of approach to learning varies. And our classical education systems were designed around sorting people, not improving skills of people, principally. And that approach actually is, the Asian countries particularly have a different approach to that.
That's really, really interesting. So, we're here in this kind of context here, trying to think about the challenges ahead. And we talked a little. You alluded to some of these challenges here, but if you had to think about the coming of these technological waves. The evolution of the platform economy. We've talked about the increasing number of independent workers and the coming of AI and automation. I mean, when you think in the educational context, how do you think of those developments as potentially beneficial and things we can leverage, things that are concerning you? Or I'm just curious, how do you think of the challenges ahead?
There are risks where technology substitutes workers, and there are opportunities where technology complements workers. Now, it can give you a rise to huge productivity gains. Now, the question is really how we can pair the artificial intelligence of computers with the human qualities of people. That is where the productivity gains come from. So it has to do with the kind of types of skills that people have. Knowledge obviously will always remain important, but routine cognitive skills lose in value. Non-routine analytic skills rise in value. The capacity of people to extrapolate from what they know, use and apply their knowledge in novel contexts, continue to grow personally, have that kind of growth mindset. In a changing world, you can no longer equip people once for the lifetime. People need to assume their responsibility to upgrade their learning, to have the motivation and the capacity for true lifelong and life-wide learning in this new age. If you want to remain in work, that is absolutely essential, and that's something that is, in the past, you could put that responsibility to governments. You train people, you educate people, and then they're on their own. Today, people have to assume a big share of that responsibility, but companies can do a lot on this as well, and I think some European countries, my own country, Germany, does really well by actually companies take this kind of joint responsibility. Learning has become very modular. It's no longer this kind of lumpy degrees and qualifications, but you as a worker decide what you learn, where you learn, how you learn, when you learn. Skills are certified in much more granular ways than what used to be formal qualification. That's about the future, but the bottom line is it puts huge responsibilities on individuals. Basically, within a decade, you can be completely out of date with your skill set.
So I can see putting a lot of responsibility on the individual, but take the German case, as you just mentioned. It also requires this ecosystem to be quite differently developed and developed in a very different way. Could you describe a little bit more about what's the context you have to create for that?
Yeah, again, individuals need to be willing and capable to continue learning. And that means basically it's effort, it's hard work, We used to learn to do the work, now learning is the work in a way for people. So that taken for granted, then you need to create the context for this. Are employers, for example, willing to share your time between working and learning? Do they recognize skill-based learning now? If there are no incentives, if there is no kind of wage premium for gradual learning, then people will not make those kinds of investments. Work-based learning in itself is a very powerful way for upgrading your skills. Now, it's not about, sitting in a classroom or learning from a computer. A lot of skills can be attained at work. The big question is, are employers, reducing their efforts to giving you kind of very short gaps, stopgap measures to fill current skill needs, or are employers willing to invest in your next job, in your next kind of qualification, putting sort of effort into the future? And I think that's very critical. You cannot expect that people accept they lose their job if they don't feel prepared for that next one. And so in those kind of ecosystems, you need to have a collective willingness of employers to invest in human capital that may not accrue to themselves. That's the kind of question. Why should I, as an employer, make that investment if then my employees go somewhere else? But that's why sort of you can't put that on individual employers. You need to create an ecosystem where there are incentives to do that. And countries like the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark are quite good at that.
So they've essentially created a policy infrastructure driven by government to kind of not just encourage it, but also to kind of demand it or something, or some kind of...
Several things. Think about apprenticeship. If you are a big company, you can provide a lot of training. If you're a small company, it's actually really hard. So what the government does is it creates partnerships, shared opportunities. You can share an apprentice, you can share training facilities. And those things are not things that companies actually easily do on their own. You need a kind of structure for this. The second thing is, talking about qualifications, how do you actually define skill sets, qualifications in ways that extend, across employers, across industries? A big role for government or the public sector to place accreditation mechanisms. Who actually recognizes learning? And those things don't fall from the sky. If you are a huge company, you can do that. If you're a medium or small kind of enterprise, you need that kind of infrastructure. And that is a big part. We used to see education as, schools and colleges. We have not, conceived education and training in the way that it really extends through any moment in people's lives in a truly lifelong learning. If you look at the United States, your investment in education, very little in the very early years. That's a pity, because that's where, important social emotional skills are framed. A lot of investment in schooling, a lot of investment in college, and then it drops. And there comes very little. It's basically up to companies and people to decide on that. In the future, we need a much more kind of gradual investment in the skills of people. Some countries are Singapore is introducing a training account. You get a certain amount of money that the government gives you. If you go to college, fine, but you've used up a lot of that. If you want to learn later on in life, well, that's up to you. So encouraging this kind of more lifelong, life-wide approach to learning.
And Singapore does that, you're saying? There's that's fascinating.
It's called Skills Future in Singapore, yeah.
So, well, there's much to learn on both those. The Singapore example, the European examples. Well, one of the things we're trying to identify is some of the most promising ways forward, and you've identified a bunch of them. But given as someone who is in this space of skills and learning, where are the areas you think we need more work or more research or more energy to think it through to make the system work better? Besides building on what seems to be some really good ideas already, but it seems to me that there's still much more to be done.
Yeah, most of learning today, particularly institutional learning, is about the transmission of knowledge. And that's basically losing rapidly in value. Because, it's not about what you know. Google knows everything. It's about what you can do with what you know. So greater emphasis on creative skills, on social skills, on emotional quality, character qualities. We think about resilience, curiosity, courage, leadership. And some of those things are actually not taught, they're caught. That's where actually work-based learning can be a very powerful way of, teaching you those kinds of.
Well, they're not taught, but say it again.
So some of those skills are not really taught; they're caught.
Caught. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like character
you just
qualities.
pick them up somehow.
Yeah, you see people. You work with people, and actually, for some people, that's what makes work-based learning really attractive. No?
Oh,
and it's a sort of transition that we haven't really got into. We invest huge amounts of money in getting people, sitting long hours in school, and may miss some of those very important opportunities. Early learning is another good example. Take the United States, it's very patchy, kindergarten and early childhood education, often framed around care, not really development. Yeah. But actually brain research shows that the years 1 to 3 are the most important years to build some of those social and emotional qualities that are going to be hugely influential on your later success.
But you mentioned earlier that if you don't get that critical early development, a lot of research shows it's hard, if not impossible almost, to pick that up somehow?
No, learning gets harder and gets more expensive as you grow older. Some learning, experiential learning, you can learn throughout age, but particularly so the acquisition of changing habits, changing behavior, that's really, really hard later in life. But in the early ages, we can actually, for example, collaborative problem-solving skills. We've just tested this in our latest PISA assessment. It's amazing to see that how some countries are not only good in individual skills, but people are also very capable to share knowledge, develop joint solutions, and that is a skill hugely at a premium in the digital age, where we are no longer working in silos, but where you need to connect the dots, where the next innovations are going to come from. Your capacity to work with people who think differently from you, who come maybe from different cultural contexts. Those kinds of skills are very hard to develop later in life, and we often miss the opportunity where we can do that best.
And we know how to actually do those, or we generally know how to encourage collaboration from those early years and how to build that into educational systems?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot that we know that we don't do currently. I mean, language learning is an obvious example.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way how brain research shows you will never learn a language is if you are in secondary school, in high school, and have an hour of French on Monday and an hour on Thursday. The brain just doesn't absorb languages like this.
Yeah.
But we do that simply because we have the institutional structures and the staff that do that best. So I think there's a lot that education needs to learn to be more ready for the
totally
digital
get that.
age.
Now, if you're, we're getting towards the end here. So, but I'm just curious if, when you look ahead here in the next couple of years, even, what kinds of things would you want to see happen across the OECD kind of countries? What would you say would be the most important shifts you'd like to see kind of happen early here?
The first is really to create the kind of infrastructure, institutions, and incentives to make lifelong and life-wide learning a reality for all, to give people the opportunities to decide, where to learn, what to learn, how to learn, when to learn. I think this is absolutely crucial so that people, keep moving when technology adapts. Because in the Industrial Revolution, we had a once-for-all chalk, and then people had to upgrade to this. Today, it's a continuous evolution. It's the first thing, sort of, to build this culture of lifelong, life-wide learning. The second is to shift from, the reproduction of subject matter content, learning something, towards developing the kind of social emotional qualities and character qualities that really give people the drive and the motivation and the capacities to work in a diverse, complex world, in a world that is ambiguous, volatile, complex. Sort of what you need today is to have that kind of compass and the navigation skills to find your way through this world. And if you don't, people get lost, and that's where people then get upset with the kind of world that we have now.
So do you think, so just like we've seen in history, the building of the elementary schools, high schools, college infrastructures, graduate schools, do you feel the missing piece now is, and the one for the 21st century is this lifelong
Yeah,
Right.
I think in the initial phases, if you think about initial education, learning science needs to be much more about your capacity to think like a scientist as opposed to know a lot of things in biology, chemistry, and physics, to think like a philosopher, to think like a mathematician. So epistemic understanding is very important. But then transversal skills, curiosity, creativity. And we need to learn how to foster those skills better. Every child, every newborn is creative, unbelievably imaginative, a great problem solver. And the longer they are in our current schools, the less creative children become in a way. Our schools are, oriented around compliance, conformity. We test things at the end that are actually largely about, the reproduction of subject matter content. So those things are really an urgent need to change. But beyond that, you can no longer assume that what you learn in school is going to last for even, a decade after you graduate. So people's capacity to change jobs, to adapt to new kind of environments really depends on their capacity to grow, to have that growth mindset that gives you the willingness to do that, but also the possibilities. And that learning really needs to be everybody's business. The energy and willingness of people, the kind of infrastructure at work that allows you to share, to continue to learn while you work, and then governments who create the kind of facilities, incentives, and the broad infrastructure to get employers putting that together.
And last question, how confident are you that we're going to make it through this transition in a way that you kind of envision there?
Well, you see, I see huge variability across the world. I'm most confident at the moment in countries like China, Vietnam, Japan, that Singapore, that really put sort of huge investments in human capital. The Chinese are spending their last effort, their last money in the education of their children, which is their future. In the Western world, we have already spent the money of our children for our consumption today. Now, that's why we are so heavily indebted. So the willingness of societies to put, to invest in the future, to put people first is really, I think, where we can learn a lot from East Asia. Northern Europe, Finland also, a country where lifelong learning is quite well established. Denmark, Sweden as well. But then you go sort of Southern Europe, or you go to the United States, where you can't see very much of that. The United States lives on talent that it attracts from the outside. Is not actually really good in developing talent at scale. You take some elite universities, that's great. That puts the kind of tip of the iceberg. But when you look at the bulk of the talent, I think these countries are severely challenged in the future. So in a nutshell, some countries are really on that path. But I had a very interesting conversation with the governor of Junction in China, province which is in western China, sort of a relatively poorly developed province. And this governor was talking with me about 21st century skills. And I asked him, why do you focus that much on those kinds of skills in this province that really is still so basic in its economic structure? And he said, well, we produce 45% of the laptops for Hewlett Packard here. No? But in a decade from now, each and every of those jobs is gone. So we got to think about the generation after. You don't hear much of that thinking in the Western world. No?
Well, let's hope that changes. So thanks so much for being with us here, and it's been a great conversation.
Thank you.